I just want to say how much I'm happy to be there in Moscow for the first time, and what we call in France eternal Russia. And I'm very, there is a lot of emotion to be present here for this first time. So, as Mr. Parshin told you, Mrs. Arp is not there, and I will present the French organization. As you see in the summary, few topics. I will be very short about the models of centralization, decentralization, because Mr. Mosley already said everything about the topic. So, France, a long tradition of centralization. We were talking about that during the coffee break, and France, of course, has 1,000 years of tradition of centralization. If you remember the monarchy, the revolution, the Fifth Republics, from Charlemagne to Napoleon III, every regime has installed tradition of centralization. That's maybe why how we succeed in the creation of our nation. The decentralization is very new in France. It happened in the 80s. It was we had to wait until the arrival of President François Mitterrand, who made 110 proposals to French people, and this proposal was number 54. And it was transformed by a law in 1982, which creates a deep reform of territorial organization. General de Gaulle tried to make a reform about regionalization in 1969, but it was a referendum and people said no, so he left the power, definitely. In 1982, this huge reform precised the roles of the regions, and now the regional councils are elected by the people, and everything is enshrined in the French Constitution. This is written milestone, but for me it's more, it's maybe a cornerstone. The second step is 2003 under President Chirac, a new constitutional law about decentralization, which gives broader transfer of competencies to the regions. And now there is a new stake. There are new stakes, sorry, of decentralization because we have now in France what we call, it's the name of a French cake, a millefeuille. It means many levels, regions, departments, municipalities, community of territories, community of municipalities. You have we have too many levels. So the goal of the new reform is to simplify, clarify, pool resources, reduce, of course, public expenditures, and there is a huge plan to reduce the number of regions from 22 to 14, which is a huge controversy in France because there are 22 presidents, and I think maybe next year or the year after there will be only 14. So it's difficult to leave the power. So we will see. We will have to merge regions. For example, I live in the east of France, and the project is to merge Alsace and Lorraine, the two regions in the east of France. That's all with the history. So this is the slide. I don't want to talk about too long because Mr. Mosley already said everything about managerial or administrative decentralization and political decentralization. Let's talk about the French public employment service. So in France, we are in between decentralization and in between centralization and administrative decentralization. The first stake in our administrative decentralization is to empower the managers in the drawing up of strategy, local strategies, and how to implement it at a local level, but also to support them in the allocation of means. We have 4 decision-making levels. Of course, if you have to remember 4 figures, 1, 26, 100, and 1,000. Of course, the head office that defines the national strategy, the roadmap, that participates in the drawing up of the tripartite convention that rules Pôle emploi every 3 years. And the head office also support the local, the regions and the regional directors. The general director is directly responsible of our results on the authority of the Minister of Labor and Employment. 1 head office, 26 regional offices, 100 territorial offices, and 1,000 local job centers. At each level, you have different responsibilities. And if you refer to the human resources, you can see that you will find the same hierarchical organization. The director of a local agency depends on a territorial director, who depends on a regional director, who depends on the on the general director. Anyway, can we talk about a decentralization process at Pôle emploi and why? I could say yes, this is kind of decentralization process. I will quote 3 elements that can prove the beginning of the decentralization and why we need this process of decentralization. First of all, our local network on the whole territory needs a broader leeway to adapt service to the local needs. I will come back later to these local needs, but we are a very small country compared to Russia, of course, but we have huge differences between the regions. Second point, aids and services matching national priorities that do not always adapt to local stakes. Of course, what is useful in Paris is not always working in Nancy or Marseille or in the countryside. And finally, diversified and complex local situation. It's always this same concept of differences between regions. This is why Pôle emploi needs, on one hand, an adaptable service delivery, responding to local needs, and on the other hand, an adaptable organization able to answer to these needs. If I carry on with the differences, we can talk about the strengths of being centralized, a centralized public employment service. Pôle emploi wants to keep its position as key stakeholder in the implementation of national employment policies, but not only the implementation, also I could say the design of employment policies. One of our main principles is to maintain and to guarantee the principle of equal treatment of territories. This is very important for us. The difference differences between rich regions and poor regions could make or organize some inequalities, differences between job seekers. We don't want that situation. The centralization may be a strength for the staff, for a very strong information system, for the procedures, even if it is not, like said Mr. Mosley, like McDonald's. But it's a strength, and also for the labor market information system. There are also the opportunities to overcome territorial inequalities on the labor market. Like in Russia, we need to facilitate mobility, professional mobility, and encourage the people to go to the regions where there is employment. But we have to fight, I told you, against the huge differences. 7% of employment rate in the east of France. It can be more or less 15 in the south, and in the overseas region you can find 30% of unemployment rate. There are also strengths in an administrative decentralization, of course. Our roadmap, Pôle emploi 2015, the main commitment was to do more for those who need it most. This is confirmed for the next 3 years. And to succeed, we act closely with local stakeholders. But to succeed, we have also, and it has been said before, we have also to build, to organize a capacity building at a local level. Because the managers at the local level has to be able to design relevant territorial diagnosis. They have to achieve objectives through the adaptation of services according to the specificities of the territories and optimize the resources, budget, and human resources. Just a few words about our strategic priority roadmap. This roadmap was defining 5 objectives linked to decentralization. You can see that better match the action of Pôle emploi with the local needs, bring decision-making closer to its territorial level, strengthen local stakeholders' leeway, improve customer satisfaction, which is very important for all of us, and also improve employees' working conditions. Pôle emploi has to work with multiple actors, as you know, and of course, if we have leading actor on the labor market, we must work with many, many other partners. What we call in France, la directe, is the regional office for business, competition, consumption, labor and employment. It's the representative of the Ministry of Labor and Employment, but also economy and social affairs at a regional level. We have to work with the regional council. The regional council is in charge of economic development, training policies, territorial development, settlement, main regional infrastructures like roads and so on. We must work with the district council. We called it the departments in France. They work, their powers are about social issues, and we work together with them on the, job seekers. We work for to help them to find a job, and they work with them to help them to have a better health, to have somewhere to sleep, and so on. It's a kind of global support. So you can see that we are living a huge evolution at Pôle emploi from hyper-centralized service to decentralized, administrative decentralized service. A service offer must be adapted to the competencies also of the stakeholders. And what is important, I didn't tell you, but maybe a lot of you already know that we had to merge 6 years ago between the Public Employment Service, INPE, and the insurance for job seekers, ACEDIC. So during this period, we had to centralize everything, because it was a very difficult period to marry two different cultures. So now these days are over, and we have created, I hope so, a new culture. And now we are able to give, to empower the local entities. Another example of why we keep some centralization. Another objective of our roadmap was to participate in the transparency of the French labor market. We have now more than 30 providers that have joined us to add their vacancies to ours on the Pôle emploi website. So it's a huge process, you know, because we have some principles and we cannot publish any kind of vacancy. There are rules. That's why it's good to be centralized and not to go everywhere without respecting the main rules, like no discrimination, salaries, and so on. Are we going finally to decentralization? Another proof, yeah. Pôle emploi is a unique legal entity. You know, the general director has the power on each employer of Pôle emploi, but he has transferred his competencies to the regional directors, as they can manage human resources at a regional level, but also the budget, the implementation of national decision and orientation, and adapt them to the local needs. Concerning the budget and the free use of 5% of the budget, it's few, but it's the beginning. With this 5%, the regional directors can, and also, of course, the local directors can use the 5% to do what they want. Not, of course, for traveling, but to organize trainings, to organize things that correspond to the local needs. This is the beginning. So you can see the implementation requirements. If I have to say a few words, like, say, Adriana said, accountability, adaptation of tools, and management by objective. Some examples of priorities areas in which we work with local partners, like 1,100 priority training plan, the financing of vocational training with the region, the global support that I already talked about with the district councils, the regional annual convention that draft the action plan for a region, including not only employment, but also infrastructures and so on. And what is very important is the tradition of dialogue between stakeholders and reflection of regional characteristics. and Pôle emploi wants to take part in this dialogue as a main stakeholder in the field of employment. As conclusion, I could say that decentralization is as a means to improve our mission matching and placing, but we have for that a national framework. But decentralization can help us to answer to local needs. We need to assess this decentralization. That's why every year we have a survey about that. How we were at the beginning of the year, are we better, what are the results, efficiency, of course, and partnership. Because you can have national employment policies, but also you can find very interesting regional or local policies that you can work with the local partners. Here we are. Thank you. Spasiba for your attention.